schemer, seducer, tyrant, trailblazer. Queen Elizabeth I has been called them all. She's one of those legendary figures who loom larger than life in English history. Mention her name, and most people recall the Golden Age, the Spanish Armada, the Virgin Queen mythos. But behind that image lies a host of dark intrigues, unsettling family drama, heart-stopping near misses, and enough royal scandal to fuel a whole streaming series. Today, we're going to dive into the lesser-known corners of Elizabeth's life story and uncover the secrets, tragedies, and triumphs that shaped this extraordinary monarch from cradle to grave. Picture it. England, 1533. The entire kingdom buzzes with gossip because King Henry VIII has just broken with Rome to ditch his wife, Catherine of Aragon, and marry Anne Boleyn. The stakes are enormous. This is the infamous union that sets off the English Reformation, a massive religious and political shift that shakes Europe to its core. Into this storm of scandal arrives baby Elizabeth. Her very birth is practically a front-page tabloid moment. She's the living symbol of Henry's monumental divorce and Anne's alleged powers of seduction. In other words, Elizabeth is born under the kind of spotlight that no child should have to endure. But this is only the start of her bizarre, often brutal upbringing. If we want to talk real-life Game of Thrones, let's begin with the fact that Elizabeth's father literally sends her mother to the chopping block when Elizabeth is just over 2. One day, you're the king's favored queen, the next day you're arrested, and by May 19th, 1536, you're headless in the Tower of London. That's Anne Boleyn's arc, and little Elizabeth is left in a precarious position. The father who once doted on her as my royal daughter quickly casts her aside in favor of his new wife, Jane Seymour. Jane walks into the palace a mere 11 days after Anne's beheading, which in modern terms is the emotional equivalent of your parent remarrying before the funeral is even over. And if that's not tough enough, young Elizabeth soon acquires a new baby brother, Edward, who instantly becomes Henry's golden heir. If fate hadn't ultimately intervened, she might have lived forever in his shadow. Growing up in the Tudor court means living in the crossfire of familial chaos. Elizabeth's older sister, Mary, despises her, partly because Mary herself had been declared illegitimate when Henry set aside Mary's mother, Catherine of Aragon, in favor of Anne Boleyn. From Mary's point of view, Elizabeth is the spawn of the woman who usurped Catherine's position. No matter that Elizabeth is just a child, sibling rivalries among royalty seldom involve anything so simple as playground teasing. By her teenage years, Elizabeth is coping with a father who barely acknowledges her. She has so little financial support that her guardians have to plead with the king's court for funds to buy her new dresses. Then, in one of those bizarre twists of fate, Henry dies in 1547, and Elizabeth is turned over to the guardianship of her stepmother, Catherine Parr, who promptly marries a man named Thomas Seymour. If you thought My Dad Executed My Mom was the darkest part of Elizabeth's upbringing, buckle up. Seymour's next moves are the stuff of nightmares. Thomas Seymour, around 40 years old, begins making creepy visits to Elizabeth's bedroom when she's still in her early teens. We're talking about him arriving at dawn in his nightgown, tickling her, slapping her on her rear, and basically crossing every boundary. Meanwhile, Catherine Parr not only tolerates this but also occasionally joins in, as if it's a twisted family game. The apex of this horror show comes when Parr physically holds Elizabeth down while Seymour rips the princess's clothing. Eventually, Parr stumbles upon Seymour and Elizabeth in a romantic embrace. Whether Elizabeth is genuinely attracted or simply terrified and coerced is an open question, but the outcome is that Parr sends Elizabeth away. Not long after, Parr dies in childbirth, and Seymour, now a widower, wastes zero time trying to corner Elizabeth again. Finally, the royal council intervenes, charging him with treason for scheming to marry Elizabeth without permission. They behead him in March 1549. It's all so dramatic that it's easy to forget Elizabeth is still in her teens through most of this. By the time Elizabeth is young and single in her late teens, her father is gone. Her mother was long ago executed. Her stepmother is gone. Her sister Mary is hostile, and her brother Edward is on the throne. The Tudor family soap opera continues when Edward dies in July 1553. He leaves the crown, bizarrely, to Lady Jane Grey, bypassing both Mary and Elizabeth. The sisters team up, overthrow Jane, the 9 Days Queen, and Mary becomes queen. One might expect a heartwarming sisterly bond to blossom, but Mary is devoutly Catholic, Elizabeth strongly Protestant by birth, and religious tension in the kingdom is at a boiling point. Mary's nickname, Bloody Mary, emerges from her persecution of Protestants, which includes burning them at the stake. A rebellion breaks out in 1554, and Mary suspects Elizabeth's involvement, locking her in the Tower of London for 3 terrifying months. Elizabeth is dangerously close to the executioner's axe, but a handful of Mary's advisors caution mercy. When Mary finally relents, she releases Elizabeth into house arrest in the countryside, far from Mary, far from the throne, and far from any direct influence. But this is Elizabeth Tudor we're talking about, so you can guess she's not down and out forever. Mary's paranoia may have other roots too. Some rumors suggest that Mary's husband, King Philip of Spain, had a wandering eye that landed on Elizabeth. Imagine the royal tension if your husband is basically planning, if Mary dies in childbirth, I could always marry Elizabeth. It sounds more like a soap opera than real politics, but that's the Tudor age for you. In 1558, Mary, childless and frail, passes away. And just like that, Elizabeth, the once neglected outcast, ascends the throne as Queen Elizabeth I. She's 25 years old, and after all she's been through, she's ready to redefine what it means to be queen. From the start, Elizabeth cultivates an image that sets her apart from other monarchs. She never marries, ultimately earning the nickname the Virgin Queen. While it's a romantic story that she had no consort but England, the truth is more layered. There's Robert Dudley, her childhood friend, rumored favorite and lover according to some. People at court whisper that she adores him. There's just one problem. Dudley is already married. His wife, Amy Robsart, is gravely ill with breast cancer, so everyone expects her to die soon anyway. Then, in 1560, she does die, but not from cancer. She suspiciously tumbles down a flight of stairs to her demise. The coroner calls it an accident, yet tongues wag that Dudley had orchestrated her death, hoping to clear the path to Elizabeth's hand in marriage. For a brief moment, the Queen seriously considers it, but her advisors revolt at the idea. Dudley, despite his closeness to Elizabeth, isn't exactly powerful enough for an advantageous union, and the scandal is too hot to handle. Elizabeth, always mindful of the kingdom's stability, sacrifices her personal desire and never marries Dudley. Still, she keeps him extremely close, fueling rumors for decades. Parliament pressures her to marry, especially after a near-fatal bout of smallpox in 1562 scares everyone with the possibility that she might die childless. She recovers, but the nation's officials are in a frenzy, insisting she must choose a husband. Elizabeth addresses them, basically saying, "Relax, I'll marry eventually," then promptly ignores the subject for the rest of her life. She famously retorts to an envoy who tries to push the marriage agenda, "I'd rather be a beggar and single than a queen and married." In a society where a woman, even a queen, is expected to wed and produce an heir, Elizabeth's refusal is downright revolutionary. Maybe she loathes the idea of giving up power. Maybe the trauma of Thomas Seymour lingers, Or maybe she just likes the leverage her single status gives her. Whatever the reasons, she stands firm, to the mounting frustration of her advisors. Although she keeps these big-hitting foreign princes dangling, remember Mary's old husband Philip of Spain proposes at one point. Elizabeth's real passion often seems to be for some of the men around her court. One of them is Francis, Duke of Anjou. She parades around wearing a frog-shaped earring he gives her, setting court gossips into overdrive. She never marries him, of course, but it's just enough of a dalliance to make everyone wonder. This pattern repeats multiple times. Foreign suitor arrives. Elizabeth flirts diplomatically, then declines. It's a brilliant, if slightly mischievous, strategy for staving off unwanted alliances and keeping rival nations hopeful rather than hostile. Meanwhile, Elizabeth is busy forging her identity as a formidable ruler. She's no pushover. Stories abound about her quick temper and sharp tongue. If someone dares to say must in her presence, like a counselor suggesting she must go to bed, she'll snap, "Must is not a word to use to princes." But for all her rages, she's undeniably brilliant. By the time she's in her 20s, she's likely one of the best educated women of the era. She can speak multiple languages, some say up to 11, ranging from Latin and Greek to Italian and French. She's so adept at languages, some historians suspect she's a polyglot in the truest sense, picking them up easily and speaking them like a native. Elizabeth also knows how to keep appearances. Remember that as a child, she wore tattered dresses until her guardians begged the king for money. As queen, she amasses an enormous wardrobe, some say over 2,000 gowns, and she's not above borrowing a particularly fashionable dress from a maid of honor if she likes it better. But her love of fashion has another side. She's quite vain, especially as she ages. She uses a kind of makeup made of lead and vinegar, horrifically toxic for her skin, and keeps applying thicker and thicker layers to conceal smallpox scars and age lines. At one point, a courtier accidentally catches a glimpse of her bare face before she's put on her mask for the day, and Elizabeth punishes him with house arrest. So sensitive is she about her fading looks. That's the level of image control we're talking about in the Elizabethan court. That doesn't stop the less charitable observers from noting her decaying teeth, caused by a notorious sweet tooth and a phobia of dental work. Over time, her teeth turn black and start to rot, and foreign dignitaries complain they can't even understand her speech sometimes. In a bizarre sign of wealth and status, some women in the kingdom actually try to emulate those blackened teeth because sugar is so expensive that discolored teeth suggest you can afford the sweets that cause them. Elizabeth's face grows so thin from missing teeth that she reportedly stuffs her cheeks with cloth in public to maintain a youthful shape. She may have questionable dental hygiene, but she's cunning on the political stage. She keeps a close watch on England's nobility, always ready to banish or imprison anyone who crosses her. Take the example of Robert Dudley, the love of her life, or so the gossip claims. When Dudley secretly marries her cousin Lettice Knollys in 1578, Elizabeth is so enraged that she bans Lettice from court for life. She never forgives that perceived betrayal. And for all the chaos around her personal relationships, Elizabeth's reign has plenty of high points. Exploration flourishes under her watch. She supports voyages like Francis Drake's legendary circumnavigation of the globe from 1577 to 1580. Meanwhile, the arts are on fire with the works of William Shakespeare and Christopher Marlowe. She's not exactly funneling money into these writers' pockets. She's no Medici. But the stability of her reign helps create an atmosphere where they can thrive. But while Elizabeth remains single, she can't ignore one huge threat: Mary, Queen of Scots. Mary is her cousin, a Catholic with a claim to the English throne that many view as stronger than Elizabeth's, given the controversy around Anne Boleyn's marriage to Henry. From the start, Mary undermines Elizabeth, fueling rebellions and inciting political foes. Elizabeth responds by having Mary put under lock and key, literally for 19 years. That's nearly 2 decades in prison. Eventually, evidence surfaces that Mary might be helping a rebellion from behind bars, at which point Elizabeth signs her execution warrant. What's interesting is that after Mary's beheading, Elizabeth acts deeply remorseful, even claiming she signed the warrant without realizing her advisors would carry it out so quickly. Historians remain skeptical. It's hard to sign a death warrant by mistake, but Elizabeth is a master at controlling the narrative. Mary's fate stands as a testament. Cross Elizabeth, and you might find yourself in mortal peril. Another huge moment is the confrontation with the Spanish Armada in 1588. King Philip of Spain, yes, the same Philip who once proposed to Elizabeth, launches a massive fleet to invade England. Everyone expects the Spanish, with their formidable navy, to dominate. But a mix of English cunning and Spanish miscalculations leads to a stunning English victory. In the midst of it, Elizabeth famously visits her troops wearing a silver breastplate over a regal white gown and delivers a legendary speech. "I know I have the body but of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king." This imagery cements her status as a fearless monarch. While modern historians point out the victory was more about Spanish errors and a stroke of luck than about unstoppable English sea power, it does catapult Elizabeth to new heights of popularity. Still, she makes her fair share of missteps. A year after the Armada's defeat, England sends a fleet of its own to attack Spain, and Spain crushes them, killing thousands of English sailors. But hey, the propaganda machine doesn't dwell on that. Elizabeth is the warrior queen who faced down the might of Spain. There's a magnetism to her that keeps people fascinated, and she skillfully uses that to her advantage. She goes so far as to say she's married to her people, calling them her husbands. For someone so protective of her personal freedom, it's a brilliant rhetorical move, single in name, but symbolically wedded to the kingdom. Behind the scenes, though, getting older weighs heavily on her. By her 50s, she's letting go of the idea of marriage, if it ever seriously existed in her mind at all. She invests in the mythology of the Virgin Queen, encouraging comparisons to the Virgin Mary in poetic tributes and public imagery. She's also protective of her mortality. She refuses to name a clear successor until she's on her deathbed, because she's all too aware of what happens when there's a recognized heir. People start plotting to replace you. After all, she watched it happen to her sister Mary, who faced endless conspiracies once Elizabeth became a recognized heir. It doesn't help that her later years bring heartbreak. One of her favorites, Robert Dudley, the Earl of Essex, another handsome rogue who uses her affection to climb socially, eventually rebels against her. In a feeble 1601 attempt, he tries to seize the queen. Hardly anyone supports him, and the whole plot is snuffed out almost immediately. Elizabeth, with no other choice, orders his execution. Despite his betrayal, she's devastated. Word around court is that after his beheading, she can often be found sitting alone in the dark, crying over him. The emotional toll of losing people she once cared for, whether to death, betrayal, or both, casts a shadow over her final years. She also feels the sorrow of repeated personal losses. Many of her closest companions die as old age, claims the Tudor generation. By the autumn of 1602, she's said to linger in an unrelenting melancholy, lying on cushions, refusing to move or speak much. Eventually, she resigns herself to the question of succession. She never publicly proclaims it, but she quietly indicates that James VI of Scotland, Mary, Queen of Scots' son, should inherit the throne. Advisors had been courting James for a while, writing letters in Elizabeth's name to flatter him and pave the way for a peaceful transition. And so, on March 24th, 1603, Elizabeth I dies at Richmond Palace. She's 69, and she's outlived nearly all her enemies, as well as most of the people she loved. With her death, the Tudor line that began with Henry VII in 1485 ends. The crown passes to the Stuarts under King James, and England moves into a new era. Elizabeth leaves some unusual instructions regarding her remains, insisting they not be embalmed, an unusual step for royalty, and her ladies-in-waiting respect her final wishes, possibly to keep any last secrets hidden. Among the personal items discovered after her death is a heartbreaking letter from Robert Dudley, labeled in Elizabeth's own handwriting as his last letter. It's a poignant window into the emotional undercurrents she rarely let show. In the broader arc of English history, Elizabeth is the third longest reigning British queen, at 44 years on the throne, surpassed only by Queen Victoria and Queen Elizabeth II. Her legacy as the Virgin Queen has turned her into something of a legend. Poets, playwrights, and filmmakers have been obsessed with her for centuries. Think Shakespeare referencing her. Think Edmund Spenser depicting her as a virginal warrior goddess in The Faerie Queene. In Elizabeth's lifetime, these tributes were part flattery, part propaganda. They helped turn her into an almost mythical figure, the Virgin Mother of the nation, the woman who overcame personal trauma and became the epitome of regal power. Certainly, the Golden Age label stuck, and we can't deny that under her watch, England experienced a flourishing of art, exploration, and relative internal stability after decades of religious whiplash. Yet, behind the iconic ruffs and the powder-white face, we find a woman shaped by misfortune and heartbreak. Neglected as a child, nearly executed by her own sister, sexually harassed by her stepfather, passed over in the line of succession, forced to navigate marriage proposals from men who were sometimes downright creepy, and haunted by the memory of her mother's beheading. She was also, by turns, vengeful, cunning, generous, petty, incredibly vain, and supremely confident. She could break a lady-in-waiting's finger with a hairbrush during a royal tantrum, and then gift that same courtier a sumptuous gown weeks later, or slyly banish a romantic rival while continuing to shower her faithless lover with favor. Through it all, Elizabeth turned her vulnerabilities into assets. She knew her precarious position as a female ruler, so she spun the Virgin Queen narrative to stand in for the security that a king or male heir might have provided the kingdom. She tolerated her advisors' endless pleas for her to marry, and then shut them down so completely that they eventually gave up. She created a personality cult that built her up as an icon of feminine power, while behind the scenes, she navigated realpolitik with brutal calculation. Even the Spanish Armada, that shining moment of her reign, was as much the result of Spanish overreach and poor planning as it was any unstoppable might of England. But Elizabeth capitalized on that victory, giving speeches in armor and commissioning art that depicted her with her hand on the globe, effectively rewriting history in her favor. And if you're wondering whether there was a tender side to this formidable monarch, well, there's that locked-away letter from Robert Dudley, the sorrow after the Earl of Essex's betrayal, the regrets over Mary, Queen of Scots. There's her refusal to name a successor too soon, possibly because she didn't want her heir to suffer the way she herself had under Mary's suspicious gaze. There's the quiet tribute she paid to her mother, Anne Boleyn, by wearing her portrait in a locket, even though publicly praising Anne was political suicide. Elizabeth knew how to compartmentalize her personal emotions. She had to, growing up in a world that devoured weak leaders. That skill in diplomacy and public relations might explain why she rarely rewarded artists financially, but still let them celebrate her in their works. She recognized the value of being revered in poems and plays. She allowed a cultural renaissance to flourish, even if she wasn't signing big patronage checks like some other monarchs. Her approach was more laissez-faire, letting the brilliance of Shakespeare, Marlowe, and Spenser become entwined with her own legend. For decades after her death, people told stories about her as if she were a character out of ancient mythology, half goddess, half devil, depending on who you asked. Catholics demonized her as a tyrant who toppled the old faith and executed Mary, Queen of Scots. Protestants lionized her as the savior of England from the clutches of Spanish aggression. Modern feminists might see her as a proto-example of a powerful woman who refuses to be defined by marriage or childbirth. Her political enemies noted her skill for manipulation and cruelty toward those who disappointed her. And let's face it, all of these views have some element of truth. Elizabeth contained multitudes. She was both cunning politician and fashion diva, both traumatized child and unstoppable monarch, both fierce defender of England and alleged orchestrator of intrigues that cost many their lives. In her final days, depressed and mourning her lost companions, she refused to take to her bed, a possible sign of superstitious dread, or maybe just a stubborn refusal to show weakness. When she dies, the kingdom transitions to King James VI of Scotland without much bloodshed, proving that the careful behind-the-scenes preparations actually worked. And so ends the Tudor line, with Elizabeth's elaborate funeral signifying the close of an epoch. The impressive event, attended by thousands, features her effigy draped in royal garments, carried through London's streets. It might be the last big flourish of a reign dedicated to spectacle as much as to governance. Yet Elizabeth's myth endures, perhaps because she had a flair for self-promotion that few monarchs could rival. Her story is irresistible. The unwanted daughter turned cultural icon, the cunning politician who refused to marry, the virgin queen with scandalous rumored affairs, the neglected princess who became one of history's most influential rulers. Whether you admire her, fear her, or find her morally complicated, there's no denying she transformed England. Her refusal to share power led her to define herself as the one and only head of state, a choice that helped unify the country under a single leadership. Her foreign policies, though sometimes disastrous, instilled a sense of English pride, and her unwavering determination to remain unmarried literally changed the dynamic of European alliances. Those 44 years left a deep imprint, and centuries later, we still can't stop talking about her. At the heart of it, perhaps the key to Elizabeth's enduring fascination is how she managed to shape her own narrative from the time she was declared illegitimate to the day she died. If her mother's beheading taught her anything, it was that power can be swift and merciless, but that knowledge didn't paralyze her. Instead, it sharpened her political instincts, her sense of survival, and her ability to play the courtly game better than almost anyone else. She understood that the perception of power can be as critical as power itself. Every dress, every piece of jewelry, every speech, every rumored romance was a move in a chess match that lasted a lifetime. When we unravel the tapestry of Elizabeth's story, we see not just the glorified queen on gilded portraits, but a complex human being shaped by heartbreak, ambition, brilliance, vanity, and perseverance. She lived through the personal horror of seeing her mother executed at her father's command, narrowly escaped being dispatched by her sister, survived predatory men, faced invasion by a foreign superpower, and overcame personal insecurities about her appearance and aging. Through all that, she ruled for nearly half a century, giving her name to the Elizabethan age, during which England's global reach and cultural achievements soared. That's why, even today, people remain enthralled by her life, because it's not just a story of royal privilege, but a saga of resilience, shrewdness, and spectacle, all orchestrated by a woman determined to leave her mark on history. It's the story of the Virgin Queen who outmaneuvered or outlived all the threats around her, the cunning politician who discovered just how far she could push the limits of Renaissance society's expectations of women, and the cultural icon who, long after her death, still reigns in the collective imagination. Love her or hate her, you have to admit one thing. There's never been another monarch quite like Elizabeth Tudor, daughter of the infamous King Henry VIII and the ill-fated Anne Boleyn, who rose from the ashes of her family's scandals to become a legend in her own right.